Hi, and welcome to Terry Talks Movies. It's Science Fiction Saturday once more. And this time I have two movies about pulp superhero characters fighting bad guys and not being very successful as movie franchises. They're both from the 1990s, but they're set in the 1930s because why the hell not? They are The Rocketeer from 1991, starring Billy Campbell, Jennifer Connelly, and Timothy Dalton. And from 1994, we've got The Shadow, starring Alec Baldwin, Penelope Ann Miller, John Lone, Tim Curry, and Ian McKellen. It's interesting that both of these movies came out at roughly the time they did. 1989, of course, we got the really big reboot of Batman with Tim Burton. And studios were looking for a franchise like that they could hang that on, make a ton of money. Rocketeer was based on a comic book series by Stevens, which is beautifully illustrated and beautifully written. It's set in 1938 and it has Cliff Secord, a stunt pilot played by Billy Campbell, and who, along with his mechanic Peavy, played by Alan Arkin, is trying to get their plane ready for a big race. They're going to make money, and of course that's how they make a living. Cliff has a beautiful girlfriend called Jenny, played by Jennifer Connelly. In the original comic book, she was called Betty, and she looked a lot like Betty Page, because Dave Stevens really liked Betty Page, and later on he became friends with her at the end of her life. Dave Stevens unfortunately died early at the age of 52 in 2008. Jenny is basically Betty Page. She's an actress who's playing extras in Hollywood films and wants to get a decent role for herself. That's how Jenny meets Neville Sinclair, swashbuckling action hero played by Timothy Dalton, much in the mode of Errol Flynn, and playing on those rumours that Errol Flynn was a secret Nazi. I think he was a bastard in 15 different ways, but I don't believe he was a Nazi myself. A bunch of gangsters steal a secret weapon from Howard Hughes, played by Terry O'Quinn in this movie, and hide it in an aeroplane in the hangar that is owned by Cliff and Peavy. What it is a jetpack. It runs on alcohol fuel. It's not quite perfected yet. Peavy finds out how to perfect it, which is by giving it a rudder on a helmet. What Cliff and Peavy don't know is that the gangsters who stole the jetpack have stolen it for secret Nazis in Hollywood. Now, The Rocketeer has a lot of good special effects in it. It's got a lot of story there. It was directed by Joe Johnston, who went on to direct Jumanji, Captain America, The First Avenger, and Jurassic Park 3. And so the action sequences are crisp and well done, and very, very Hollywood. It was made for Disney, so it's got certain Disney aspects to it, particularly at the start where it's got a very low-key soundtrack by James Horner at the start of the film. It's got that Disney middle of the 20th century bucolic feel about it. And the screenplay's by two writers I have a lot of respect and love for, Danny Bilson and Paul DeMeo, who also wrote things like the 1990 version of The Flash and a whole bunch of cool Charles Band movies like Zone Troopers. Love their work. They had such a good pulp fiction sensibility that for me they can do no wrong. Now, of course, Dave Stevens' original Rocketeer owes a lot to these things. The old movie serials, King of the Rocket, Men, Flying Disc Men from Mars, The Invisible Monster, Radar Men from the Moon, Zombies of the Stratosphere, Mysterious Dr. Satan, and Commander Cody, Sky Marshal of the Universe. All of these have heroes with jetpacks who go and save the day. In a lot of ways, The Rocketeer is an update of these ones, even though it's set more or less contemporaneous with the original pulps that were put out in this wonderful imprint box set a few months ago. There are so many bits of old Hollywood in this as well. There's a character called Lothar, who is one of the henchmen of the secret Nazi. No secret, it's Neville Sinclair, who is supposed to be Rondo Hatton as a bad guy. Rondo Hatton, of course, was an actor who played a whole bunch of villains in 1940s low-budget films because he suffered from a disease called acromegaly, which made his facial features really large and distorted, and his hands and feet very large as well. There's a nightclub called the South Seas Club, where Neville Sinclair introduces Jenny to Clark Gable and W.C. Fields, played by actors. So it's got a lot of that Hollywood vibe about it. And there are little bits of Hollywood studio business we see in this film, which look like they've been respectively homaged from movies like The Bad and the Beautiful. There's a lot of good supporting actors in this film as well. We've got Margot Martindale as Millie, who runs the local diner where Jenny and Cliff and Peavy live. And she gets a few nice moments in there. We get familiar faces like Ed Lauter and John Polito and Eddie Jones. And Paul Sorvino playing Eddie Valentine, the gangster. Paul Sorvino gets a nice few bits of business in this one as well, as a patriotic gangster. Now, the interesting thing about how the movie came about was, in 1985, Dave Stevens gave the rights to The Rocketeer to Danny Bilson and Paul DeMeo for them to make screenplays with. They, of course, then cut deals with Disney and, of course, with Dave Stevens. So Dave Stevens liked what DeMeo and Bilson did and gave them the rights for nothing, which is pretty marvelous. There are a few other changes made to the original story as well. Rather than being a nude model, Jenny became a Hollywood starlet. In the original comic books, Betty was a nude model. But because this is Disney, they changed it to a more kid-friendly occupation for the girl. And Bilson and DeMeo did some things. They gave Jenny a little more agency as a character because she wasn't just there to be kidnapped by the bad guys and things like that. So there's a lot of tweaks that were done to the script to kind of give her a bit more to do. And they had real trouble finding somebody to play Cliff Secord. The studios bounced around a number of names before they settled on Billy Campbell, which I've got a bit of a problem with. They were looking at Kevin Costner and Matthew Modine and Dennis Quaid, Kurt Russell, Bill Paxton, Emilio Estevez. Johnny Depp was Disney's favourite choice, and Vincent D'Onofrio knocked the job back. Vincent D'Onofrio as the Rocketeer. That would have been cool. Basically, Billy Campbell got the role. He looked right for the role. He looked like the character as it was on the page of the comic books. But I'm not in love with him as an actor. I don't think he's got the presence and the gravitas, at least at that stage of his career, to be as good a leading man as the role required. The secondary characters carry the story in a lot of ways in this movie. Alan Arkin playing Peavy is great. He lifts every scene he's in, and he gets a lot of the good arch lines in it. He's a genius mechanic. Terry O'Quinn playing Howard Hughes, a very different version of Howard Hughes than the one we know even from Scorsese's The Aviator or from real life. Is a lot of fun. He's a little more Tony Stark or even Howard Stark than he is Howard Hughes. But that's okay. They're not going down that path with that character. Jennifer Connelly is fine as Jenny, but for me she's a little bit too ingenue for the role, whereas you needed somebody who was a lot sexier, in a sense, a young Charlize Theron or something like that, or a young Angelina Jolie type character. One of those women who just sizzles on the screen automatically would have been a better choice than Jennifer Connelly. But a movie like this lives and dies on how good the rocket suit works as a stunt. And it works pretty well. There are some rear projection stuff that looks a little shaky when you look at this movie on Blu-ray. There's the Blu-ray. And, some of it doesn't look great. Some of it looks fantastic, particularly at nighttime when there's the final battle at Griffith Park Observatory. The Rocketeer landing at Griffith Park Observatory looks fantastic. And the scenes where he's flying around in the battle aboard the German Zeppelin, which arrives to take the jetpack back to Germany, along with Neville Sinclair, works really well. I think those scenes really land fantastically. Apparently one stuntman, unfortunately, lost his life during the making of the film, which is tragic. But I can understand why. There are some stunts done with the rocket packs and with wire work, which were probably quite dangerous to do. This one works nicely. It's a good, entertaining little film. It's on Disney Plus at the moment if you want to watch it. But for me, the weaknesses are a couple. Two leading characters are played by actors I don't think had the presence to carry them off quite to the extent we need. You need a leading man that's going to really be front and center. A young Clooney could have played this role. That would have been good. George Clooney as the Rocketeer. I would have bought into that a lot more than I bought into George Clooney playing Batman. Dave Stevens said he was happy with about 70% of the movie. And I think I'll go along with that. I can see places where the fact that it's a Disney film made it a little less edgy than it could have been. I mean, leaning into how shitty the Nazis are would have been much better for me. I think Timothy Dalton's perfectly fine as Neville Sinclair. He knows how to play that kind of role. And we get enough swashbuckling stuff to realise that he's a swashbuckling shit, essentially. It's fairly rewatchable as well. I kind of like some parts of the movie. I think Alan Arkin is great. I think the special effects are fantastic. They did all sorts of different techniques. Industrial Light and Magic did the special effects on this one. And they even used things like stop motion animation partly for the flying sequences. And it doesn't look anywhere near like stop motion animation in those scenes. And the movie also has a timeliness now where we are, again, and I'm going to mention it, fighting fascists. And any movie that demonstrates and illustrates and shows us that fighting fascism is the way good people act is okay with me. That's why the early Indiana Jones films still hold up. Punching Nazis is never a bad thing. Now, the movie wasn't crazy successful. Budget was about $40 million and made about $47 million at the box office, which by Hollywood budgetary mathematics isn't a success. There was talk of a sequel, and both Billy Campbell and Jennifer Connelly were contracted for a sequel. It never happened. There was an animated kind of sequel Disney series in 2019, which never really went anywhere. And there have been talks of reboots and reworkings of it ever since. At one stage, James Wan was attached to doing a reboot of The Rocketeer. And there's nothing to say it's not going to happen in the future sometime. But at this stage, it just simply hasn't happened. It's a fun movie to watch. You can always compare and contrast it with these and have a bit of fun just watching guys with jetpacks for about 24 hours if you really want to. Rewatching it, I had an okay time. Timothy Dalton gets that great last line for his character, "I'll miss Hollywood," which indeed he does. That Bilson and DeMeo script does have a lot of little one-liners in it, which are subtle, and I think were underplayed by the way the movie was directed. But there is some funny dialogue in this film. Not as much as I would have liked. I think they would have been better leaning into that, and also leaning into the sexiness of Jenny for a start, and the nastiness of the enemy for another part. But there is a really nice animated sequence showing what Germany wanted to do with the jetpacks, which is done quite well by Disney animators. I kind of like that part as well. Rocketeer is a thumbs up from me. Watch it, have a good time, just don't expect too much, and then you can always go back and binge Radar Men from the Moon or something like that if you truly want to. I've got to watch the rest of these. I haven't finished watching them yet, and they're great fun. That then takes me to a much darker and more creepy movie from 1994, based on an intellectual property that predates Superman and Batman and even Doc Savage, and that is 1994's The Shadow, directed by Russell Mulcahy, starring Alec Baldwin, Tim Curry, Penelope Ann Miller, John Lone, and a whole bunch of other interesting character actors. The Shadow, for the fact that it's not particularly well known, started out Pulp Fiction in The Shadow magazine. It became a radio play with, amongst other people, Orson Welles and Victor Jory playing the voice of The Shadow. And The Shadow's backstory has changed a lot over the years. Originally, The Shadow was Kent Allard, who was a famous aviator during World War I, came back and became a vigilante. He crashed his plane in Guatemala and encountered the indigenous Xinca tribe, who see him as a supernatural being and provided him with loyalty. He acquired mystical powers, amongst which was invisibility and the ability to cloud the minds of men and to know what evil lurks in the hearts of men. He'd have his job set out for him at the moment, wouldn't he? And he's had a whole bunch of other different identities. Henry Arno, a businessman, Isaac Twombly, an old guy, and then, of course, Lamont Cranston, the rich playboy who we see in the movie of The Shadow from 1994. And in fact, in the movie, he has three identities. He's the Shadow, of course, the guy with the red scarf and the hat and the guns and the cape. Yinko, a drug lord in Tibet before he became the Shadow, before he got his ducks lined up and got his shit together. And we see Yinko in this movie growing opium poppies and having multiple girlfriends. And then, of course, Lamont Cranston. And the script for this one was written by David Cope, who's done a lot of things. He's been involved with the Jurassic Park franchise, wrote the script for things like Carlito's Way and Mission Impossible, the first one of those he did the script for. Spider-Man, Zathura, Stir of Echoes, Angels and Demons, really fine scriptwriter. And one of the things David Cope wanted to do was take it back to the original pulps, which is why we have Yinko in there, which is why we have Lamont Cranston, which is why it's set in the 1930s. Now, to get back to Yinko, Yinko meets the Tulka, who is a mystical high priest in Tibet, and the Tulka challenges him to be a better man and to use the dark side of himself, his shadow, as a superpower to fight crime. The Tulka defeats him, using the purba, which is a mystical dagger from Nepal, which has a mind of its own and can fly and is nasty as hell. And then we cut to years later where Lamont Cranston is swanning around New York City. His uncle, played by Jonathan Winters, is the police commissioner, and using the power to cloud men's minds, Lamont Cranston is convincing his uncle not to investigate this new vigilante, the Shadow, who is going around taking care of bad guys. As the Shadow, Lamont Cranston's face changes. He gets a much stronger facial features to look a little bit more like Victor Jory did in the 1940 movie serial. Lamont Cranston and the Shadow are very different beings in some ways, as indeed Yinko was a different person than Lamont Cranston or the Shadow. So like Batman, we've got a playboy vigilante happening there. Into New York City comes Shiwan Khan, who says he's the last descendant of Genghis Khan, though genetically that's anything but the truth. He too has been trained by the Tulka and has killed him after learning all his secrets, and he wants to take over New York City. He has a headquarters nobody can see. He has a whole bunch of henchmen with swords and crossbows, and he wants to get a weapon that's been created by Dr. Reinhard Lane, played by Ian McKellen, who, for the US government, is developing a nuclear weapon in the middle of New York City. I know it's called the Manhattan Project, but that's ridiculous. Reinhard Lane has an assistant called Kafali Claymore, played by Tim Curry, who's playing a real sleaze in this movie. He sleazes on to Reinhard Lane's daughter Margot, played by Penelope Ann Miller, who's a telepathic female socialite in a slinky evening dress. Because why the hell not? So you've got Shiwan Khan going up against the Shadow. You got a whole bunch of other interesting character actors in minor roles. At the start of the film, Yinko goes up against James Hong and kills him. So James Hong's in this film. And you get very familiar faces like Andre Gregory from My Dinner at Andre. He's playing the guy who runs the communications network for the Shadow. You get Peter Boyle playing Mo, who Ubers around the Shadow and Lamont Cranston. And this movie looks good. The special effects work, they started using computer-generated special effects in this movie. And some of them, to be honest with you, are better than others. This is 1994. They hadn't nailed it down yet. They also use a whole bunch of animation effects. There's some really beautiful looking action scenes in this movie. The set designs and production design are superb. The nightclubs, and you always need a nightclub in a 1930 set movie, it's just one of those rules, is pretty good. The Cobalt Club set is great. And Penelope Ann Miller and Alec Baldwin have a nice rapport as Lamont Cranston and Margot Lane. The dialogue's quite funny and cute. They play off each other really nicely. Whatever you think of Alec Baldwin, he's good in this role. But there is a lot of information for an audience to take in. You got to take in the backstory of the Shadow. You got to take in the contemporary setting. You got to take in the fact he's got this network of people who help him because he's helped out at some stage in the past. You get a lot of characters laid into this movie to tell the story of Shiwan Khan wanting to use a nuclear weapon to blow up New York City and after that take over the world. It's got a very distinctive and interesting style about it, which I really like as well. I like Mo's cab. I think it's a really nice looking cab. I wouldn't mind owning that car. I like the network of pneumatic tubes that run across the city that the Shadow uses to communicate with his people, and the way that they've got a kind of primitive, non-electronic internet going to facilitate that communication between him and his people. John Lone as Shiwan Khan, I think, is a kind of weak spot. I don't think he has the presence to carry the character. Would have been better to get somebody, for me at least, like Chow Yun-fat would have been okay in it. But John Lone, I think, doesn't kind of work as a character. I think he needed more gravitas and more menace than we get from that character. I think John Lone is a weak spot in the movie. Russell Mulcahy wasn't a fantastic director. He did action okay. But when it comes to carrying characters and things like that, he was never that great. He started out by doing music videos and commercials. And like Ridley Scott, I think that's kind of limited his viewpoint on doing character pieces. And the movie had an unfortunate timing as well, because it came out within a week of two movies that just blew the box office away. The Lion King, of course, stolen from Osamu Tezuka, and The Mask. Those movies bracketed this film and just sucked all of the oxygen out of it. And of course, it came out 4 years after Dick Tracy, the famously unsuccessful Warren Beatty movie with Madonna, based on an old intellectual property from the 1940s. And so audiences were maybe not inclined to trust movies with that kind of provenance that didn't star Harrison Ford, which is one of the problems they had with another film around the time too, The Phantom, with Billy Zane. That didn't do well because people, for some reason, didn't engage with those 1940s style pulp films. Even though they were a lot of fun and entertaining in their own rights, they just didn't get the kind of box office that the studios wanted to continue them as franchises. But if I was going to do a compare and contrast, I like The Shadow more than I like The Rocketeer. The Rocketeer's, for me, a little too vanilla. The Shadow isn't. Of course, vanilla goes with it being a Disney product, but I think The Shadow had more potential. And had things been different director perhaps, different timing, it may have hit a lot better as the possibility of a franchise. And as a movie viewer and someone who evaluates movies, I always like going for the edgier of my options. I always like the stuff that's got a little bit of blood in the water. And I think The Shadow has a lot more of that than The Rocketeer did. Both fun entertainments, good fun to watch. I'm glad I got copies of both of them. The Shadow edges out Rocketeer just that little bit. So that's what I got for you this time. These two movies, both from the 1990s, both unsuccessful as hell, both still, regardless, entertaining and fun, and a good afternoon watch. So that's what I got for you this time. And thanks a lot for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a like. Give it a thumbs up particularly because that's what the algorithm likes at the moment. You can also subscribe to the channel. It doesn't cost you anything. You can support the channel too by becoming a patron at patreon.com/TerryTalksMovies, becoming a channel member, or donating directly through YouTube. And if you do that before Monday this week, remember this is a Saturday video, you can be in the draw. Just let me know whether you want to be, if you do donate money to the channel, to get the box set of Eyes Without a Face, the wonderful Georges Frogier movie. This has got it all in it. This is the 4K and the Blu-ray, which is fantastic. And Umbrella Entertainment have given me a spare copy to give to somebody who watches the channel. And in fact, there's the other copy of it, all bound up in bubble wrap, ready to be set out. So next up, we've got the live stream on Monday, where I'm going to be drawing this prize and talking about a lot of other movie stuff. There's a lot to talk about in cinema at the moment. And the movies that I want, I'm looking forward to seeing. We're going to be doing a lot of stuff like that in the 2-hour live stream that starts at 7 a.m. my time, Monday morning, goes through to 9 a.m. And then hopefully next week, I've got a whole bunch of stuff coming from Umbrella Entertainment, which is really, really fun. So until all of that happens, watch some good movies, watch some bad movies, watch some movies with a punch of Nazi, and I'll catch you next time.